Even if you don't own any of Regina Spektor's music, you have definitely heard it in a lot of movies and TV shows. Grey's Anatomy, 500 Days of Summer. She even wrote the title track for the show Orange is the New Black. Her song Us was used in a Joe Biden commercial when he was running for president. And even though her music is critically acclaimed, Regina really sees herself as an outsider, more of a storyteller than a singer-songwriter.
You know, it's not like a song is like a chemistry experiment. On a certain day, I might sing a song and it's a sad song, but it's filled with joy. And another day, that same song is filled with longing. And another day, it's got vinegar and bitterness and venom in it.
Early in her career, she even tried to talk record executives out of signing her to a contract.
I was taking these meetings and I was absolutely freaking out about it. You know, because I was so scared of anybody like changing something or messing with something.
So in this conversation, Regina talks about what she does to get better at her craft. She also breaks down a personal favorite song of mine, Samson, and she talks about why 25 years after writing her first song, she's still finding ways to approach music in totally new ways. So here's my conversation with the amazing Regina Spektor. So let's start, Regina, if that's okay.
Please.
We're going to talk about, a bit about you and your background, and then I want to get into how you think about writing, how you write music, and how you write songs, and particularly, I'm interested in this idea of sort of the blurring of fiction and fact, and also, this idea, and I read an interview you gave a few years ago where you talked about how you're frustrated at this differentiation, this divide between fiction and fiction writers and truth writers, and so I want to kind of dive into how you write music. And actually, one more thing I want to say before we start, which is, there are probably just a handful of songs that have that for all of us have, we have an emotional response to them, and maybe it's a moment in our lives, or maybe it's something in the way the music is sort of reaches us, but without fail, because even the last few days, just listening to a lot of your music and reading a lot about you, I cannot, for some reason, I get very emotional when I hear Samson. And I watched your Tiny Desk version of it that you did a year ago. And even that version, it really, it just moves me very deeply. And I just say that because I'm not somebody who sort of normally like tears up in music, but there's something about that song. It makes me think about, I think it makes me think about my mom reading me Bible stories when I was a kid, and I loved that story so much. It was so visual. She had a Bible that she would read me when I was a kid, and when I was a kid, there were no children's Jewish Bibles available. So she had a Bible that was the New Testament and the Old Testament, and she just stopped when it hit the New Testament, and she would read me the stories when I was a kid. And for some reason, there's just this powerful – I get these powerful images when I hear that song. It's just an incredible song. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. So
wow. Well, that's thank you, and that's so meaningful. And I think I know exactly that feeling of like I don't think of music as entertainment. I think of it as like it's like a type of sustenance. And sometimes you need food, and sometimes you need water, and sometimes you need music, and sometimes you need paintings. And they all have their own kind of important place in the food groups. And sometimes you need film, And I think that songs, and I think it is a collaborative experience where it's like something that you as a listener bring to it, right? Like you're bringing that childhood memory and even your mom, through having done what she had done by reading you the stories and had connected you to Samson, the character from the Bible so much.
Yeah.
She's bringing a collaborative aspect. You're bringing a collaborative aspect. And then I'm bringing some kind of a collaborative aspect. And then the teachers that taught me those stories are, and other experiences are. And then there's like a whole mysterious something other that kind of, we call inspiration, or people called it muses, or whatever it is that the unconscious, whatever it is that we collaborate with
Yeah.
to make music, because it always feels like a collaboration to me. If somebody's like, what is this song? I don't feel like I'm the creator of the song. I don't feel like the god of the thing. I don't know it all. I don't understand it all. I just participate in it, and I feel very grateful. And it shifts from me as I grow to like what it is to me at different times. But I do think that songs are almost like a kind of method of transportation. It's like they can get you from point A to point B emotionally. And I think music in general does that. Like you could go listen to a symphony and you can't really, if somebody's like, well, what was that about? You can't really explain it. And that's how I feel about certain songs that do that for me. It's like, I can't really explain like what Famous Blue Raincoat is about, or, I can't really explain a lot of even narrative songs, what they're about, because it's almost like you go on this journey of a feeling, and then you you get like picked up, and then you travel, and then you get like placed back. And it's almost like kind of like a dream where you know that something happened, but you're back where you started in your bed, and you open your eyes and you're in reality, but something has been shifted. And I think that's what I look for in songs that I love, and I think that that's the most useful I ever feel in the world, besides like when I'm taking care of my, kids, or being a good like member of family and friends and society. I feel like I feel the most useful when somebody has that experience with it. It's like, okay, I got to participate in the world in that way, where I got to be somebody's transportation emotionally, because I need it so much. Like I get it from, art, I get it from music, and, all those things that I listed, from film, from so many things. And I really need it. Like I need to be able to go on these journeys.
Do you remember as a kid, because you grew up in Moscow up until age 9. Do you remember the first piece of music that you heard that affected you in that way? That was like what Samson was for me, just a piece of music that really just moved you.
Well, I had, it's very hard to say I now have my mom still, but I had these amazing parents, my mom and my dad,
Yeah.
who were...
I'm sorry, but I know your father passed
Yeah.
last year, and I'm sorry.
Thank you. It's still so shocking, honestly. I'm just constantly shocked by it. But they both were such lovers of music, and music was such a huge part of life since in utero, that it's really, my mom told me stories of that she was a conservatory professor, and she would had to do all this work, and I was a baby, and I'd cry, and she would just put on a Bach record, and I would just get quiet, and I would just be like, and then it would end, and I would scream, and then she would run over and she would flip the record. And they had a really incredible classical music vinyl collection. It was all from Melodia, which was the one, I think, label that existed in all of Soviet Russia. And I have these very vivid memories, sort of similar to what you said about your mom reading you a very grown up, not children's Bible, you know. So when you don't have all these pictures and everything is not super simplified, you really do get a lot of images in your mind. And I had this, I really had a huge connection to Tchaikovsky ballets, Sleeping Beauty especially, because we had this box set, and on the cover was this tiny little drawing of a little baby cradle, and that's it. And I would just stare at it, you know, and listen, and it was evocative, you know, and there was all this space to take things in. But I really do think that the very first kind of earth-shaking memory that I have of music was my dad had this, I think they were definitely Mozart. I don't know if they were, I was too little. They were either symphonies or they were like piano concertos, but there was like orchestra Mozart, and I can't remember if there was solos. And I was in the living room and it was on. And it was one of those where when I started out, it must have been just dusking, you know? And we lived on the first floor in a very kind of already very dim, not light-filled little apartment. And there was two rooms in it, like the living room where we had the bookshelves and all the music was there and the, you know, sound system. And my parents slept on a fold-out couch. And then there was a little room, and I lived in that room, and I had the little Petrov piano and also kind of like a funny couch that you could actually just lift the side of it that you lean on, that you sit on. And I could like almost like a little crepe. I could roll my sheets and blanket into it and close it. It was something that had belonged to my great grandmother. And so, you know, I was in this living room and it was kind of dusking. And I guess while I was just like dancing around and listening to this Mozart, it got dark, really dark, like pitch black. And my parents were just in the kitchen cooking, and nobody thought like, oh, we need to go and turn on lights, because they were just doing their own thing. And I was in the living room. And this memory of listening to the music in pitch dark, I think it was like it must have heightened my senses. And I still to this day, you know, talk about that thing of emotional. I have a very hard time not tearing up when I listen to Mozart. And it just, the way I describe the feeling is it almost like, it's like the way certain intervals move. I think of it as like it pinches the soul in this way, like at the heart. It like compresses and then releases and compresses and releases. And through that, it's almost like, it's like kneading your soul like dough into this state that is, it's like so, I don't know. I guess talking about it is like that thing that they say, like dancing about architecture, which I have seen people do and is amazing. I think dancing about architecture actually makes a lot more sense to me than talking about architecture. But it's like something I can only explain to you with like a breath or something. It's like a state. And so I remember that, I think, as this huge monumental feeling. And because we were, you know, in Soviet Russia, and because religion was not in any way part of the equation, and nobody talked about God, nobody talked about nobody talked about traditions. My grandmother somehow every Pesach would have matzah from the Moscow synagogue. But we would eat it alongside bread. It would be laid out on a table next to, you know, black
Right.
bread and, there wasn't like this. I didn't know anything about anything. But when I was little, I was 100% sure that music was God. Like I thought that
Wow.
was it, because of that feeling. And only really once I immigrated, to America and I started going to Hebrew school, and I was the first person in generations who could openly learn the traditions and could study Hebrew, and everything was out in the open. It was like this miracle in my family. And then I was like, oh, God is God and music is music. And they separated in my mind. But I thought music ran this place. I thought it just was like the benevolent, powerful force that was the divine.
Wow. You were a pianist. I mean, you are obviously, but that's from a very early age. That's what you were studying. I know that your mom taught at the conservatory there. When did you? Was there a point where you also found your voice? I mean, I'm assuming that when you started learning piano, it was, you know, to play classical music, and then as it was sort of people realized you were actually quite good. Maybe people around you thought, well, one day Regina can play in an orchestra, or can play on stage. But when did you start to sing to the music that you were playing?
Well, I'm practicing very hard not to be an interrupter because I'm such an interrupter when someone talks.
It's okay.
But
Yeah, no,
my
please.
first instinct when you say the word pianist is to just be like, no, 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 I am not a pianist. I never became a pianist. At my greatest moments, I never achieved that. And I do hold that as a very special vocation that I, in a dream, would have loved to achieve. But for numerous reasons, I had to acknowledge sort of the system that I was given. And actually, in life, I do think that a tremendous amount of suffering that people go through in this world is they have dreams that are maybe not in step with their system, with who they really are. And it's not necessarily their fault because maybe they're carrying the dreams of their family or their community or society, and I think it causes a tremendous amount of suffering. Whereas like, who they want to be or what they want to do is not in step with what they actually are built to do and would come naturally to them. And sometimes it's just that it doesn't even enter your mind that that's a possibility. Maybe they didn't see it represented, or maybe if they did, they could just never imagine themselves as that. And I kind of had that with songwriting. So when I was really, really, really little, everybody would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be a composer, because I'd had these huge feelings. And so I was thinking about Mozart, and I was thinking about Bach, and I was thinking about Prokofiev, and I was thinking about Tchaikovsky and Chopin. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to be that. And it was very lovingly explained to me, well, that is for the geniuses of the world. And actually, you don't even want to be that because they suffer with the burden that is this huge, deep, genius. and you don't want to be one. But you do have talent. And if you work really hard, and practice the piano really hard, because that was an instrument that I loved since I was little.
Right.
Then maybe, just maybe, you could become a pianist. And I was like, okay. And so I started to make that mental shift. What happened was, you know, I was, me studying the piano at all after we immigrated was a miracle. It was a miracle that was gifted to me by, Sonia Vargas and Sam Martyr, who lived up the hill from us in the Bronx. They lived in Riverdale.
Because your family had no resources when you arrived to the U.S.
Yeah.
There was nothing.
Nothing, really nothing. No, and no, not
Yeah.
even it wasn't even like a dream that someday we would, because my brother was just, my parents were newly pregnant with my brother. We were refugees. There was no income. There was no, path to an income, really.
They didn't speak English.
They didn't
I'm
speak
assuming.
English. It was just, it was like, it was just not even an option. And I was very, very sad because I was quite serious about it. I started when I was 6. We left when I was 9.5. The half really meant a lot to me at that age, It was like I was always 9.5. And then there was this, kind of year of time where I didn't have a piano. I didn't, even longer, I didn't have a teacher. And then through this incredible, meeting on a subway on the 1 train, my dad met Sam, and Sam invited us to their house. He's a violinist. Sonia's a pianist. And I just, in that way that children who don't think about logistics, but just think about themselves, I was like, can you be my teacher? And my mom just was like beet red, and Sonia said, of course. And so from then on, from the age of, I guess, like something like 10.5, I had a teacher all the way up through my teenage years, and they never took a penny. I mean, never, not even once. My parents worked and really gifted me my ability to have, these imaginary things become tangible. And so, but in my mind, I was still always gonna try to be a classical pianist. And, then certain things come into reality. Well, it's hard for me to memorize things. Okay, I'll just practice a lot. Things that, she also gifted my cousin, who's now, she went a different route. She's brilliant, and she's a pediatric neuropsychologist, and she does these incredible things and helps kids with, she's just brilliant. But, my cousin, could memorize 30 pages, but she could also read a phone book and memorize it. She's now she reads case studies like they're like cracking peanuts,
Right.
And for me, I'm the kind of person who has to read slowly and think about things and then space out for a bit and think about, that thing and that, and connect these weird dots and stare out a window for a while and then go back to practicing, and my hand is really little, which, there are great real pianists that are classical who have little hands who can do it, but they have this incredible talent to practice. That was something that I realized, that practicing and wanting to practice is a talent in itself. Right? It's not enough to feel things deeply or have a musicality or a musical ear or a love of it. It's like, in order to be that rocket that gets off of the ground, and into and breaks through that barrier to float and look upon the earth, you need those powerful, powerful, fiery engines that get you off. And those engines are, practice 5 to 8 hours a day. And it's the Olympics. It's like somebody being like, I really want to be in the Olympics, but I'm
Yeah.
only going to jog for like, 20 minutes every day. And it's like, well, you're not going to be in the Olympics because an Olympian does this. And so a classical musician, they do that. And I was like, couldn't reconcile it. And then when I hit my, teenage years, I was like, oh, I want to read all this Shakespeare. I want to read all these books. And the practicing sort of became really, really hard because I had such a pull towards books. And then I was just, for a couple of years there, I was just very, very sad. I was so sad because it was dawning on me that I wasn't going to be a musician. And I had nothing else that I wanted to be. So I was just like this lost soul. And I only thought of it in terms of, classical music. Because, I grew up listening to the Beatles and the Moody Blues and Queen and these incredible Russian bard singers like Vysotsky and Akudjava. I didn't know any women. It wasn't even in my mind that you could be a songwriter or you could do something like, it was like, it wasn't even a thing. And then when I was 16, I went on a scholarship on this trip to Israel. And it was this trip that kind of saved me, honestly, because I was like really, I just didn't know what to do with any of my creativity. I kind of felt like absolutely alone, in it. I wasn't that great at school. I would be given these assignments, and instead of doing the assignment, I would just be reading like fiction, and then I would get into, and so things just, they didn't add up in any way for me.
Yeah.
And I would write poems, but I didn't know what to do with any of it. And they weren't that good. And when you're playing great music, like if you're playing Scarlatti, and then you're just like, and you're reading Shakespeare, it's like there's no room for you in anything. It's like it's all great stuff, and you're just not needed. It's just go away, be quiet. Take it in. Don't give anything back, please. But I went on this trip. It was called Nesiyah, which means journey. Mm-hmm. And it was started by this amazing man, Charles Herman, who lives in Israel now. And his idea was taking American and Israeli kids and offering actually a bunch of places on scholarship to Soviet Jews, which was very special, and taking them on a creative sort of teenage trip through Israel, where you learn some of the traditional stories and you learn some of the old, like, traditional things that root you in Judaism. But you also meet a desert sculptor or somebody who uses shofar in mystical music in a different way. Or you go to listen to, like, an Arab a group of Arab musicians and listen to them play. And it was all so open, and it was all, we would do these, creative things. Like we would get some clay and sculpt and just be artsy together, and I was in heaven. But the part of the trip that was very difficult for me is because I was this bookish piano kid. So like my posture is like naturally, like hunched over, Right. I would get out of gym class and I would say I have a stomach ache. I was just like it's actually one of my great regrets as an adult now, because I have been working so hard to be healthy and strong and all this stuff, that I wish that I just didn't, that I had a culture of sports sportiness in my family, but we were all just like books, music, art. You know?
Yeah.
And so the thing is, because it was Israel and it was the summer, when we would go and we would have these, we would sleep in a sleeping bag in the Negev and look at the stars, and we would like wake up at 3 a.m., but then we would have to hike in the heat of the day. And I thought I was dying. Like I was this Bronx city kid who was like, I am going to die. And the only thing that I guess started happening was I would sing to myself, because I'd always kind of sang to myself like while doing the dishes and in the shower and in my room. But it was just one of those silly things, and my family would make fun of me for it. And, I would hike and I would kind of sing to myself, and I would make up these songs, I guess. And it wasn't even very conscious, because I was sort of in this like in between, almost like, heat stroke land. I did have a heat stroke at Masada. That was the final thing that like knocked me out. But then when I would get back and I would kind of come to and drink a lot of water, these kids, these other teenagers on the trip would be like, you have a really good voice. Or I liked that song you were singing. I was like, I was singing a song. And they were like, well, you should try and remember what you're making up.
You were just singing just fragments of things that popped into your head?
Yeah, I was just like, I must have been. I was making stuff up, like little melodies. And that still happens to me all the time. I mean, I think I just make stuff up and sing it in my life. And then I remind myself, like maybe the driver of the car doesn't want to listen to you sing for an hour, but and I do it quietly, but yeah, it just naturally happens. And so because they started pointing it out, and because I didn't have a piano and I was missing playing music so much, I started putting that sort of love of music into the singing, and I would remember. And then we would have projects, everybody would have to present something, and I would present a song that I made up. So I would try and remember it, and more kids would hike sort of near me because they liked it. And then at the end of the trip, I think it was something so obvious, where somebody was like, well, when you go back to New York, you should try and learn an instrument, like pick up a guitar or something, so that because then, you could start writing songs, because you're already singing songs. And I was like, I know an instrument, and it was just like this, like huge, very like right here, obvious thing where it's like, just try it. But I think because classical music is it's so inspiring and it's so good and it's on such a level that it never even entered my mind to sort of like, just mess around, because it's, you don't want to play the greatest music in the world and then hear literally the worst music in the world that you're making.
So you came back and sort of found this, I guess, this window, for you to explore. And what do you? I know that you eventually would go on to study music composition in college. And tell me a little bit about how you started to approach words and music. I mean, obviously we know so many of your words and so much of your music today, but when you were sort of 18, 19 years old, how did you start to kind of, was it the same thing that you were doing as a teenager on that hike, when you were just kind of, I keep thinking of the character Selma in Dancer in the Dark that Bjork played, where she would just be doing the dishes or doing something else, and all of a sudden a song would come out of her,
Yes,
based on what she was seeing all around her. And I mean, was it sort of like that for you?
Yeah, in a way, I think that that part of like musicals is kind of true. Yeah, to me. It's very natural to burst into song and to have an idea. But so when I returned, it went, what was really, really interesting is that, that difficulty that I had pushing myself to practice and sitting down to the piano, that disappeared. All I wanted to do, everything was just the stuff I do between sitting down to the piano. All I wanted to do. And the process was really, it was really awkward, and it was really, like, it was really hard for me, first of all, to go to coordinate, learning to coordinate singing and playing. And also I would hear things that were a lot more nuanced and complicated than what I could do. So, but everything would come out as like this oompa, like everything was an oompa. And I was like, okay, oompa in C. And like, and I didn't really, because I think a lot of music has seeped into me, right? But I didn't consciously study it. And even when you say you studied composition, I kind of feel very imposter syndrome, because, except I think it's real, because the program that I was in, it, like, this thing happened magically where I tested out of the freshman classes, because I guess through just playing that many years of classical music, I had enough of solfege and all this kind of music theory, basic stuff. And so I just got put into these second year classes where I didn't understand anything. And I had these huge holes, but I kept getting away with things because I could just write songs. And a lot of our projects were like, bring in a song, record a song. I didn't really ever learn how to use the studio, because the program was like 98% male, because that's who went. It was all these guys who knew how to play guitar and and wanted to learn how to work the studio. And I was absolutely terrified of wires and buttons and all that stuff. And they always needed somebody to record. And I was just in the practice room 24/7 making things up. So I was like, I'll, and so I could kind of just jump in on their projects. So it was like one of those things where I learned a lot. First of all, the things that I learned there was like, I listened to jazz for the first time. I listened to blues for the first time. I had no idea about anything. I got exposed to a tremendous amount of music. So just that education alone, and understanding, like, learning about the musicians' lives, learning about, Louis Armstrong, and learning about, Charlie Parker and all these people. It was just, that was my education, and then also being like, they would like play a Patti Smith song. They would play an Al Green song in class. And I'd be like, oh my God, I have to discover these people, and it would be my first time listening to a tremendous amount of music. But when I got home, that beginning time, so once I got slightly past the Oompa Loompa stage of it all, I was, what it was? It's like, because I played music that varied so much, I was so afraid of making the same song over and over and over. So I would just really try whatever I had done, I would do differently. So if something was arpeggiated and it was flowing and it was like had pedal, then the next thing had to be like staccato and really no pedal, or it would be in a really low register. It would be a really high. I was basically like, I was on a quest, I was like, and I was terrified of being boring. It was very scary to me. Because I remember thinking, like, who would ever want to listen to more than like 15 minutes of somebody playing piano and singing? It's so boring. So then I thought, okay, well, if I make everything so contrasting, and one thing will be like this kind of a feeling, and the other thing will be like this kind of a feeling. And so I think that's also where I started leaning on fiction so much, because I loved characters and I loved imagination. And I was like, well, you can have somebody really sincere, or you could have somebody super demented, and you could have somebody really angry, and this person actually lives in a basement, and they're the, and if you live in New York City, you live in a million stories, and you're on the bus, you're in the subway, you're on the streets, you're on top of that, you're reading, which is like, here's the world. Here's your conversation with the last few thousand years of human life, then you're just, and all those Hebrew school stories were always present. I think in a way, like all those archetypal images of like, and they would just make appearances, and they would, and because I had so much great literature that I loved, that was the bedrock, then Shakespeare could be a type of, bedrock that I could plant things on, and all these wonderful, Pushkin was too, and all these other things. And so I just was like, oh, I could do everything, like I could do anything. And it was just such an open, and my really was like pushing past limitations, trying to, how do I have as much independence of my left hand from my right hand while singing that I could achieve? Because in classical music, I had achieved that separation, and I knew the joy of playing, freely. But as soon as I added the voice, it was like back to square one, and it was a really kind of fun challenge.
I read that your parents would come to every recital and performance that you gave, and they were really encouraging you to become a musician, which is not really like a stable career choice for most people, right? Because it's a tough world to kind of make a living in. When did you feel like this? I mean, did you feel already by the time you finished college that this is the thing I want to be? I want to pursue this. I want to be on a stage and play music and sing for people.
Well, I have to tell you, as soon as I was singing those a cappella songs on a hill in Jerusalem to those 15 kids, I was like, oh, I want to do this somehow, And I think that, it's hard sometimes to figure out your way in, because people they just do things, and you're like, but how did you get there? Like, what did you do? And so even when I was, because all on the way from that 16 till 18, when I entered college, I was like, well, I have to go to college. I want to go to college, but like, what do I study? And so I just looked at, and everything was opera or jazz,
Yeah.
And I was like, I guess jazz is closer, but I don't know anything about jazz, and I was like trying to, you just kind of, that's the thing about this world. It's like, you just try to fit yourself into these roads that somebody says, well, maybe, I guess this is the closest. I got very, very lucky because my mom was teaching in a school in the Bronx, and she met this other teacher who was a very overqualified for teaching there, Joel Thome. And he had been Frank Zappa's best friend and had conducted like Zappa's Universe and all this stuff. And I did like a press play. I would record myself on my boombox. And I would just press, play and record. And I would make these
Record and play.
cassettes. And it would just be, they would be like me singing whatever weirdo songs I was making up. And my brother, you could hear him smashing toy cars in the background by my door, in my room. And she brought one of these cassette tapes to Joel. And he said, well, there's a program at SUNY Purchase that she should audition for. And they concentrate on actually songwriters. And she's a songwriter. And I was like, that's a thing? And
wow.
And so I was like, okay. So I think I mailed them a cassette tape and, filled out an application, and I got in, and that's kind of how I luckily escaped years and years of like training towards something that I don't, even though I'm sure you could get something out of everything. Sometimes I imagine this life where I also learned how to sing opera or learned all of the jazz chords that I love so much and have no idea how to play. But really, my parents, they were amazing in that way, where they just, I don't know, I feel like being gifted parents that are not like, and especially after a life of so much hardship financially and so much struggle, that they weren't practical people. You know what I mean? Like they weren't run by practical things. That's not the engine that
they
ran
didn't say,
them.
go be a doctor or an engineer.
Yes. And I think that what happened was, it's a type of, to me, we talk about like, what is wealth in this world, right? Like everybody wants to have wealth. And I think about it and it's like, well, I think of wealth, besides the obvious, like having a healthy body and mind and spirit. That's like the wealthiest you could be in this world, as far as I'm concerned. But I think wealth to me is like quality of life, right? And what is quality of life? It's like quality of your interaction with your reality. And your reality is the world around you. So if you are taught to walk out the door and inhale and be like, oh my God, I smell rain on pavement. I love that smell. Or, that way that the sun feels so good on my face. Oh my God, that's amazing. Or, that sounds so beautiful. I love that song. What is that? Or, all of that stuff, that's really like wealth. And the more your parents can put into you these things that are basically free, like somebody teaches you to love literature, boom. If you spent all of your days going to the library for free and taking out books for free, you will never, ever, ever read through the great literature of our world. Ever. That is beyond riches. What a gift. And somebody could be like living in a mansion, step out and be like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And they're like, they're broke. They're bankrupt.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I think that because my parents didn't allow for their hardship to make them into these people who made decisions from a place of fear or a place of like, we must acquire, they knew I was fine because I was like, oh, I could couch surf. Oh, I could do this. Like, I know it's not an easy life. Oh, I could play in the room where nobody cares about what I'm doing, and it was funny because actually my mom told me this really funny. because I really was, I think, one of the few people in my whole music conservatory whose parents were excited for them to be a musician and a songwriter. And I felt, my heart really went out to kids whose parents were always talking them out of it or just not that supportive. I mean, that's not a good feeling. But my mom has this very good friend, and her son is exactly my age. And he was about to enter. He had gone to Rutgers, and he was going to study, I think, like mathematics and like the academia kind of like math stuff, because he was just fascinated by it. And his mom called my mom, and she was like, what is he going to do? He's academia, it's so difficult. Like, what a difficult life. And my mom was like, listened to her for a while. And she was like, well, you are talking to a parent whose daughter is going into a music conservatory. And now, of course, her son is like, runs a huge hedge fund and he's just fine. But I had to, and this part kind of hurts me now in hindsight, but I know I kind of had to do it. There came a moment where I had to ask my parents to stop coming to shows for like a little bit. And it really hurt their feelings. And I was like, because I was playing like dive bars and all kinds of places. And it was literally just because I wanted to know what it feels like to play for people where there's not my parents lovingly beaming at me from the front row.
Right.
Just being like,
people who just happen to be there, and you're the entertainment that night.
Right. And a lot of the time, it's a hard way to kind of, you learn so much, but it's definitely a hard way to kind of, toughen up for a sensitive person who's so used to having loving parents who are like, anytime I would write a song, I'd be like, I'd call them into my room and they were always the first to hear it, them and my little brother. And, I exited Purchase. I was playing bars and cafes and
in New York
City on the Lower East Side mostly. And I was like, oh, well, I'll earn enough money. And I was working a temp job. And I was like, I'll earn enough money to make rent someday. Even like, be one of...
What was your temp job, by the way?
What? Oh, my temp job?
What was your temp job?
I was actually, I was a receptionist in an OBGYN office in Soho.
Wow.
Yeah.
This was in like the early 2000s?
Yes, exactly. Actually, I had worked there during sort of like summers and breaks at times, but I was supposed to start my job on September 10th of September 11th year.
Wow,
and so
2001.
Yeah, 2001 exactly. And I actually got the full-time job on Monday. They called me and they said, you could start next day. They want you in next day. And for whatever reason,
Wow.
And again, I don't know how I think this ability, luckily my parents did teach me to like listen to my inner voice, I guess, when you give yourself that freedom to follow your instincts. And I said, can I start Wednesday? Because I just wasn't ready. It was like I needed one more day of freedom. And they really insisted. And it was one of the rare times in my life. I didn't lie often, but a couple of times I lied, and it was just based completely on instinct. Things would just come out of my mouth. I said, no, I have a dentist appointment. And they were like, okay, fine, come in on Wednesday. And then September 11th happened the next morning. And I was so glad I wasn't downtown, right? And that office, there was for a week, I did start on Thursday. And for weeks after that, those subway trips with, everybody, all the newspapers would just say anthrax, and everybody, anytime the subway stopped, I was like, are they, is it going to be full? It was
Wow.
a very scary time. And we did have a lot of, because the office wasn't just an OBGYN office, it had other doctors in it. And there were people with burnt hair that would come in, and they were like, I walked down from the 82nd floor. I need to be seen now. There was all this high tension, and
Wow.
it was very intense. But yeah, that was my temp job for a while. And I have to tell you, I was terrible at it. I was absolutely terrible because when I would get stressed out, there would be so much technical things to think about. And I was so full of music, and I was so full of lyrics, and I was so in that I had just come from where I was constantly writing songs, that I was all these like little, how medical offices have these like notes you could leave for the doctor and all this stuff. I would just have my bag, my tote bag next to me, and I would just write tiny little lyrics, and I was always like, throwing them in and trying to remember phone numbers and, or who did what, while I was continuing what felt like an epic poem in my mind, and I just so was, all I wanted was for somebody to say, it's okay, you don't have to do this. You could just go write music. And what was happening was, the commute from the Bronx to, Mercer Street was like crazy. I had to take the one train, and then I would take, the shuttle, and then I'd take the NR train, and it was just, and by the time I came home, I started realizing that all I wanted to do was like heat up a bowl of soup that my mom had made and like turn on television, like maybe watch Friends and Seinfeld, and then just like go to sleep. And I stopped wanting to make art. And I realized, hey, I'm not ever going to earn enough to make rent in the city anyway. So I just came to my parents and I sort of said, can I just live here? Can we actually just throw away this idea that I'm like going to save up for this rent, imaginary rent that I will never earn enough for? And I could just live here with you and just be in my room and just work on songs. And they were like, okay. And they gave me again this gift of just, you can work on music. This is your work.
Yeah.
No one's paying you for it. But if you want to work at this, you can work on it, and we can sustain this for a while. So, I did what I could. I would help around the house and stuff like that. But really, I was kind of a, I ate their food and, and I did laundry in the building, and I just wrote a lot of songs. And then but then I went ballistic trying to play everywhere. So I went and I played every bar, every cafe. There were times where, because I don't know how to drive still to this day. Shh, don't tell anybody. It's embarrassing. But I'm such a Bronx kid that I'm like the subway, and then later the luxury of, taxis. My God, that changed my life. It's the greatest thing that ever happened was getting signed and getting to ride in taxis. But yeah, I am. Sorry.
I am. No, sorry. I'm curious about, sort of the evolution of you working through music in your bedroom, your childhood bedroom, and really kind of figuring out what was good, right? Because I think the first time I ever heard your music was the song "Us" on from your album Soviet Kitsch, and it was a beautiful. I was living overseas at the time when I first heard that. I was actually living in Jerusalem. I was a reporter there at the time, and it was just, you hear a song and you're like, who is this? What is this? Who's singing this? And so when you were, we're talking about, that record came out 2 years after, September 11th. So you were probably working out ideas that would become songs in the record in your childhood
Oh yeah.
bedroom. How, walk me through how you did that. You're in your room by yourself. Are you getting feedback from anybody? Are you listening to what other people think about it? Or are you just listening to yourself and sort of figuring out what's good and what's not?
Completely, I would say listening to myself, because I was very much, and it kind of set me up for that kind of thinking, that it's, to me, it's weird. It's like, and I guess, I don't know what it's like for everybody, because I'm constantly surprised how different everybody feels making something. It is, their process is so different from each other. But for me, it felt like something starts, right? And I still marvel at this, like even with production, music production. There was nothing there. But then as soon as you build something, because it's all relational and it's all the dynamic of it to each other, you instantly know this is wrong. This is right. Things become so obvious. Now it's all based on your aesthetic, your taste, your expression, but it becomes so clear. And so I think that when I was working, everything was just malleable. It's like you're swimming through liquid that then becomes jello, and you might be in jiggles a little bit, but basically it's set. And then it becomes cement, and then it sets as hard as a rock. And it was when it was hard as a rock that I would play it for somebody, or, play it, at a show. And I don't know why, there was some part of me that was like, you don't like it? You don't have to like it. But this is it. And even I think when I was already, I had been like kind of making songs for a while and broke for a really long time. But even when labels started talking to me, I think my biggest fear was anybody messing with the creative process. So I was constantly expressing to them how I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that, and this is who I am and this is what it is, and I'm going to be a slide, and all I need is for you to project me bigger, but I don't need help with what's inside the slide. And I was like very obsessed with that. And to a point where, the man who ended up signing me, one of the two men, Goldie, Michael Goldstone, was like, why are you talking me out of signing you? And I was like, I don't know, but it was like a big fear. And so, but I think that it was this like I will take any of the difficulties that come with this life, right? I will take any of the, maybe people ignoring or talking over the songs, or even saying something rude or heckling me or anything. If I know that the thing is an actual pure expression of myself, then I could take it because I love it. And I think hearing anybody's anything was just, I was really closed off. Now I feel like I'm more collaborative as far as production or arrangement than I have ever been. And still, if you were to talk to people, they're like, "Oh no, she's like, she wants what she wants and how she wants it." But to me, I feel like I've gone miles, But it's just, I guess it's what you feel inside.
I'm curious about when the time you really started to get attention. I mean, that was also a really important moment for New York music, right? I mean, the Strokes, who you you toured with, even before you had, a major label debut. There was the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Interpol. And that whole world of like New York music was really strong in the early
Mm-hmm.
2000s. And how did you? I mean, you know, when you signed with the label, right? Was there like an attempt to sort of categorize you like Regina Spektor is this or that? Because I guess there were, there's lots of singer-songwriters who play piano: Billy Joel, Elton John, Carole King, Tori Amos,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, there are examples of that, but the scene and the world you were coming out of was so different from that. It was like that indie sound, that intense, and you were, as I say, I mean, you toured with the Strokes, so you were kind of part of that world. How did you see yourself in sort of, in sort of the music, rock and roll, whatever world writ large? Like, how did you fit into that, or maybe not?
You know, I think because I didn't grow up with the record business, like I was sort of like record labels' worst nightmare. I didn't buy any records. I didn't have any money. As soon as people could make like, instead of mix, people would make mixtapes for me. People would, as soon as you could burn CDs, forget about it. Like I had
Yeah.
everything I had was burned CD. And I've always since then been, huge pro sharing, pro taping, like putting it out there music. Because as somebody who was really locked out, I mean, I didn't get to go to shows till basically I was playing them, really,
Yeah.
and that I was very much like, we have to let people in somehow. But I think that because I didn't have that reverence for like this label and these people were signed to this and these bands, and I knew nothing about sort of how the pieces fit together. And there wasn't this kind of like, because if you think about it, right? A lot of these institutions, like the Grammys or the Oscars or all these things, they're kind of like, they're like self-made moments of the businesses. They're basically business expressions of themselves. So the Oscars were created by studio heads because they wanted to create these events and sort of hype up movies and have these pinnacles. And now we have taken the art that is acting, right? And filmmaking. And we have married it to this business venture, right? And the Grammys is the same thing. And so I think a lot of these businesses are sort of like self-congratulatory. They
Yeah.
like people who play the game just right. Same thing with radio. And you hear it about these kind of people who are on the outskirts, sort of people who are rebels or people who maybe didn't want to play the game. And they pay a certain price for it. And
Yeah.
I didn't know all this consciously, but I think because of how I was and how protective I was, that it was even a miracle that I got myself to a psychologically sound enough place to get signed, because I was taking these
Yeah.
meetings and I was absolutely freaking out about it, because I was so scared of anybody like changing something or messing with something until I found it myself, until I wanted to discover it first and then bring it. I didn't want, and I knew enough to know, when like when you're a teenager and you think you're smarter than everybody else. I knew luckily enough that even though I felt like I was smarter than everybody else, that I was not smarter than these mostly men, that they were there for a reason. and that they knew how to play the long chess game, and they knew all these rules that I didn't know. And I wasn't going to be like the first person in history to like, shake the hand and then come out and still make art. And so I think I played such a quiet game. I said no to a lot of things, and I would only go at my own pace so gently that for the most part, it was like I got to kind of live in my own little ecosystem, and I was happy with it. I also knew certain things about myself. Like I knew that it panicked me, the idea that people would recognize me in the street. So anytime I would do like appearances, I would wear certain kind of makeup. I would say no to certain appearances. I would say no to certain very kind of out there, experiences. I would say no to being in certain like things would come along and I would say no to them. And it seemed crazy to everybody that was working with me, but I think ultimately, and maybe if you're trying to get a certain kind of recognition, it is crazy, right? But if what you're trying to do is have like a path where you get to make art and you get to kind of live in a certain way where you're tethered to the world in a way, in the way that you need, right? I need to be tethered to the world to make the art that I make. Then it's not crazy at all because it doesn't disconnect me from my experience. Like I need it. I need to be able to stare at somebody for like 30 minutes on a subway car and look at their face and overhear their conversation and just be like a little blurry spot. I can't be very special all the time. I like moments. I like visiting that world, on occasion.
I mean, it sounds like what sort of. I mean, you have been able to have success as an artist, but also you've been able to have a normal life too, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, except that, like, to tell you the truth, being surrounded by musicians, I mean, it's still much more than a life of music is a life of struggle for most musicians. It shouldn't be that way based on the importance of the job and how much we value and need music, right? It shouldn't be. But also being a teacher shouldn't be such a, that's right. Literally like one of the most important jobs. And we treat it in society as one of the lowest jobs that there is. And, so I do feel like because I get to make records and I get to have this sort of safety net that nobody in my family has ever had before, ever, that it is very special. To me, that is the most special thing, like, of this job that I get to make music that I need to make. And somehow, through some miracle, there's enough people that relate to it that I can actually keep doing it, and have it like take care of us, like, and then, it's this other thing that happens, which is that when you, I don't know. I think it's actually like one of the places where I'm constantly in torn about, I'm in flux about it, where I want to be invisible, right? I want to be absolutely invisible so I could stare at everything. Like if I could have a superpower, it would be an invisibility cloak. So I could just take it all in and just be a big nothing, But at the same time, it means so much when you're able to make some kind of a difference and advocate for something, because you do have like a little podium and a voice, and be a part of special things and make people feel special, because I don't know, it's like this weird, it's really like the psychological thing that I'm constantly spinning around on.
I'm curious to get your sense of how you want your music to be assimilated by the people who listen to it. I mentioned the song Samson earlier to you, and how that I just have this emotional response to it, and it's unlike almost any other song I've ever listened to. It just it connects me to my childhood, my children. I don't know why.
That's so beautiful.
And it's there's just an effect it has on me. And so a lot of your work is inspiring and soaring. I mean, Us was used in a campaign ad recently, but I read a review of your latest record, which came out in 2022, and Robert Christgau gave it a very good review and said, and it struck me because he said, what more or less he said, what this album shows is that Regina Spektor isn't getting any happier, and I don't. It struck me as odd because I don't think of your music as sad. That being said, I mean, Russian culture is famous for celebrating melancholy. But I wonder when you write music, if you think about how you want people to respond to it, or what you want it to do for them.
You know, I really don't have any kind of desire, and I don't think of any kind of a reaction. It's not like in a way, it's not like a song is like a chemistry experiment. So if you combine this and this, you get this. But if you combine this and this, there's an explosion, and here it fizzles out. And
Right.
It's so, to me, the beauty of it is that it's vast enough where, on a certain day, I might sing a song and it's a sad song, but it's filled with joy. And another day, that same song is filled with longing. And another day, it's got vinegar and bitterness and venom in it. And the thing is, it's like this world is so, it does hold multitudes, within itself. And we hold multitudes. And the fact that somebody, I would never dare to project, what was Paul McCartney thinking or feeling, or even reflect upon his personal growth or emotional state based on a song. Because the same way that I wouldn't, with Stephen King, like, that now, he took this subject matter for this short story, or or a comedian on their comedy special. I think that the whole point of living a life of art is that you try to step outside of your experience just enough so that you're not, affectating. You're still connected with a thread to your actual emotional and historical and ancestral, and who the hell knows, every kind of part that is your being on this planet. But it could become as thin as those, what are those, the internet wires that are so fine, that are, I forget.
The fiber
optic. And you could be, it could be, and then you leap into some other perspective, or some other aspect of yourself, or maybe it's like something that is 0.00001 of your soul, And now in this song or in this role or in this speech or in this whatever dance move, you're making that 100% who you are. And now you're doing it from that place. And that's very exciting to me, because then whoever comes to the show or whoever's listening to the song, they can resonate as much or as little with that. And you never know what somebody needs, and they need everything. So one person might really need that bitterness, something that's so much more bitter than what I usually am, right? But I know how to put myself there, and they could taste that bitterness and it could relieve something in them, or it could fuel something in them. And I love it. To me, the whole thing is that, one of the things that's happened to me as I've made records, because I wrote so many songs and then I kept writing so many songs, I had hundreds of songs, but a record could really be anything from 10 to 14 songs. And then it doesn't feel right to listen to a collection of songs much bigger than that. So I would pick from all over the place. So I might have a song that I wrote when I was 18 and next to a song that I wrote, yesterday. And if it felt, they would kind of become alive to me, or if they felt right to me, I would just put them on. And then, in the olden days when I still did read reviews, I don't now, because very wise friends of mine taught me not to. They were like, well, you don't have to read.
They're almost always brilliant, the reviews of your work. So, but I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but there was one that I read, and I remember just seeing, and it said something like, well, this shows a real maturing. And it was like where it had all these songs that I wrote when I was a teenager. And I thought, well, this person is projecting their idea of maturity. So either I'm going backwards or they're just, And then I was like, wait a minute, it doesn't matter. It's their perception. That's why I never like to speak about lyrics. First of all, because I don't know everything about them. But also, why would I take something that's so open and limited? That would just be such a crime. It's like taking a bird, putting it in a cage.
Regina, how do you get better at what you do? I mean, you mentioned that early on you were you were scared to make the same song or the same sound, and you would just toss things aside, when you were 17, 18 years old, in that studio at SUNY Purchase. Now, you are just, not just an established artist, but widely respected and, influential, hugely influential to other artists. We've had interviews in this show where many people have mentioned you.
Wow.
And
Nice.
I wonder, when you sit down to write music now, do you have that same voice in your head that says, this has to be different, or I have to make this sound different, or how do you approach songwriting now?
So it's interesting, because when you're starting out, you haven't done anything. So there's so much that you could do that is new to you. And that's a real blessing. And that fire and that being sick with it, that fever, like people described graffiti as that, like they get the fever and they just had to go and bomb the city, and it's kind of was like that. I had to go and play every bar and every nook and say yes and play 20 shows in 1 month, just in New York City, and at every show there would be new songs and I would just play them. And then I think what starts to happen, and this is the part where you kind of have to rage against, I don't know, I call it adulthood, but I don't know if that's the right thing, grown-upness. I think that it starts to encroach, like all these things that are life. And some of them are really hugely important, like your kids, they need that time. And, you can be a great artist and an absentee parent. But to me, that was never, ever an option. Every moment is like a gift, and I would never trade that, you know? And so there's just this like professional life starts to encroach, and logistics start to
Yeah.
encroach, and
Yeah.
you have to rage against it. You do. You have to, it's like standing in the ocean and like having that like peaceful warrior thing. You know, you bend your knees and you're like, okay, how am I going to withstand these waves that are crashing me, but still be here standing in the art? And a lot of it has to do with headspace. A lot of it has to do with like a certain kind of wonder, a certain kind of playfulness and openness to the world. And if you start to notice that, you know, the flame of curiosity is starting to dim, well, that's when you go and you hold your hands over the candle until it gets strong again, and the pilot light is strong. You strengthen it with whatever you need to. You find that medicine, whatever it is, like it could be little things. A lot of them have been created by other artists there for you. They're there for you. And you make it strong, and you fill that cup, and then you try to carve that time and that headspace. Even more than time, it's headspace, right? Because there's a lot of garbage time when you're tired or when you feel like you just, you know, the phone and the emails and the things, they just took it out of you. They just took this ruach, this like spirit, they just like blew it away, and you have to keep like filling yourself up with like the spirit. I think that I have not met many people who, unless they're like, you know, maybe they find themselves at an older age and they don't have a family, they don't have children, where they could just be as on fire writing as much as they did when they were younger. But I think that this world, this process is so wise, right? You know, they say like the youth is wasted on the young. It's not wasted.
Yeah.
It's not wasted. There's certain things that I wish I knew, but if I knew them, I wouldn't have gotten to be young. I think that the thing, it's a beautiful arc. And, you know, same as I said, like, you know, if you rage against what you are and your system, and you want to be something else, like if I wanted to be a ballerina, but here I am, a bookish piano playing, you know, hunched over, I would be devastated. But it's the finding what you are now and using that. Like, there are things that I have experienced now. And yeah, it's going to be harder for me to make that new song because I already experimented for over 2 decades.
Yeah.
You know, it's really like I started writing songs when I was 16. I'm 43 now. I have done so much music, and I'm so lucky. I'm going to knock on wood. But but you know, I also have been lucky because you know, I got to have my dad for so long. And every word that I sing now, every word that I say now is that of a person who has lost their dad. You know? And so what my records are filled with now, what my concerts are filled with now, that's a person who has given birth to children. That is a person who has, that is in a different place in their life, who has lost certain things, who has gained certain things. And so to me, it's like this idea that our society puts on people of like staying, you know, don't ever change, stay the same, do what you've done, like stay on your game. It's like, no, like let it go, change. You can't have both. You have to let go of one in order to experience the new. And so I'm interested in that. I am chasing the new. It's just that it might not be like, oh, instead of this type of thing, when I get to sit down to the piano, I'm like, oh, I've never played that thing, or oh, that's an interesting chord. How did I not find it for the last, since I was 6? How did I not discover this thing since 1986, And it's funny because I sometimes when I say my age to people and they're like, oh, no, don't tell people you're 43. And I was just like, why not? It's not some big secret, it's like this crazy thing of like, our world is like such a funny world where it's like, no, what a pleasure to be, to be alive and to try and make art from this wherever you are. Someday I'll be a person who doesn't have little children. And then I'll be making an art as a person of grown-up children. But right now, I have their perspectives filling me up. So everything I make has a little bit of that in it. I didn't get to have that when I was 20.
Yeah. Regina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much for the kind words you said about Samson. That really means a lot.
That's singer-songwriter Regina Spektor. We'll have links to some of Regina's music and performance clips on our show notes. You can find them at thegreatcreators.com/Spektor. That's Spektor. And if you want to listen to our show, just search for The Great Creators in any podcast app. You'll find it, and make sure to click the follow button. You can find all of our conversations and videos at thegreatcreators.com. And you can also subscribe to this channel so you never miss a new conversation. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Guy Raz, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.